Well, a day like today with the heat outside is a day that I think we can be so much more thankful that we have a room with the wall and an AC unit. That is, you guys remember? You guys remember last summer, like how hot this room got? Like when it was like a hot day, it was like, all right, we're wearing shorts, we're preparing, we're drinking water beforehand. Like it's gonna be so hot in this room. If you can think back to what it used to feel like in this room when it had three walls, it was very, very hot. And we can look over there at that wall, and I'm sure everyone in this room is probably thankful that it's there. But to you, like just look at the wall right now, like it looks just like a pretty simple, straightforward wall. It honestly doesn't seem like that big of a deal. But if you guys remember last week, what we had you do before the service, or after the service maybe, is do a little thank you note to some mystery figure named Bob, right? And Ian got up here and said, hey, Bob is a great guy. Bob made this happen. And then you guys all blindly wrote this guy a thank you note. You don't know who he is. You don't know what he did. And you just said, thank you, Bob. And many of you guys didn't write a note. You just wrote, thank you, Bob, smiley face. Thank you, Bob, smiley face. And it's like, I don't know who this guy is. I don't really know what he did or the amount of things that he did. And so on a day like this where it's this hot, we are experiencing the blessing of this room. I'd love to educate you a little bit more about this mystery man named Bob. Can I educate you on Bob and all that Bob has done for you so that you can know who this guy is? Like, is that exciting? Like Bob. That's why we call him Bob the Builder, okay? Because that's what he is. He is a builder. He helped us build this. And this process of, just look over there, just a simple wall. This process started in July of last year, okay? Right after revival, came to the pastors, and I was like, guys, we can't do another summer of the CSM room being 100 degrees. Like, we can't do it. Everyone's falling asleep in my sermons, and I don't think they're that bad. I think it's just, they're that hot. And so, let's, please, can we have a wall? Por favor. And they were just like, you know what? They're like, okay, let's do it. So, right after revival, I went back at my email inbox. That's when we started the ball rolling with Bob. Which we knew Bob from before because he did all the other stuff. But anyway, we reached out to Bob and we're like, hey, we want this wall. This is where we want it. This is kind of what we want it to look like. So back in July, that was 8 months ago, that's when this wall started, at least the process. So we get together. Step one of Bob and the process is architect, right? So we got to go reach back out to the architect that did all of the other stuff with the building, and we had to change the plans a little bit. It was going to look a little bit different from before, so we had to go change that, do all that kind of stuff, and then we had to go plan the AC situation and try to figure out how the AC is going to happen. And we got a structural engineer involved. Looked up at the roof, looked up at the ceiling, literally right above you, and said basically oh, we're going to need some extra braces to basically structure the top of this roof here, because with the amount of weight that this 5-ton unit up above, it's going to come crashing down. So we got to change all these things with the roof and the structure and all of this stuff. And so anyway, Bob's getting involved with that. Bob's making sure this happens. So he says, okay, actually we have a structural splice over there, and we're going to duct over air over to this side, and it's going to go through the wall, and we've got a place over there that it's not going to fall through the side, and that's going to be all good. And then so we go to the city in December. We do a permit in December. They pull the fire permit, and then the planning department permit that comes back in January. Typically, it takes about 6 months for the AC unit to come into America and to get it to this place. It got here in 2 or 3 weeks or something like that. So all of these things, Bob is orchestrating all of these things. And then once the permits are into the city has the permits for this wall for, I think it was about 2 or 3 months. Okay, so 2 or 3 months, the city, it's literally just a wall. There's nothing special other than a door right there and then a circle hole up at the top for the duct to go through. And so it's in the city for 2 to 3 months. There was some issue with the permits, go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, finally get it to go. Then they had to go put some struts, some braces into the thing. And then we had to bring some electrical stuff down from the top of the conduit down to the side to get the thermostat in. And am I boring you by this point in time? Okay, yeah? Little, okay. Continue. So then Bob, what does he have to do? He has to call the inspector, and the inspector comes. He takes a look at that. Then he gets to call the drywall permitters. Drywall guys come over. They put the stuff on. Calls back the inspector. Inspector comes, takes a look at it, says yes. And then the drywall guys come back. They texture the wall. They cover the wall. They cover all the different stuff there. And then inspection again. And then so Bob gets back every single morning. at 5:30 a.m. Who's opening up the building? Bob, every single day. And so then we had to figure out the carpet. And he knew a guy that had some extra carpet from their thing. He bought it like secondhand. I don't know if he like Venmoed this guy or whatever, but he basically got this for super cheap. This carpet, look around the other parts of the church, you will not find this carpet anywhere. It's like it's random carpet. Like it's not in the auditorium, it's not in the kids' classrooms, it's not upstairs. Bob's orchestrating all these things. Every morning, 5:30 a.m., he's here. I probably had 25, 30, maybe even 40 meetings with Bob since July of last year to get this room into all that it had to do. So inspections go, then we cover it, and then another inspection has to come with the fire department, and then another inspection has to come, and they take a look at it. All of that because Bob said this. Bob said, I want those students to have a room that has AC and a wall, which I bore you with all those details because I want you to see that Bob the builder right here, he actually had to do hours and hours and hours of work so that you can sit here with carpet under your feet, with AC over top of your head, and then a wall right there so that when you throw the Papa Shot ball too far, it bounces off the wall and comes back to you. Bob made it happen. Bob the builder. And maybe construction is not your thing, and construction is definitely not my thing. I've learned a lot in the last 8 months and 2 years about construction. And I'm sure there's a lot of other things that I'm forgetting about and I'm missing with all the details. Point being this, it looks like a simple wall. But if you go a little bit deeper under the surface, there's actually way more context that had to happen for that wall to be built right there and for it to be built on the timeline that it had to do, which is why I had to start asking the pastors and Bob last year in July, because I said, I want the wall by next summer when it gets hot again. That's how far in advance we had to go plan this out. Point being this, you didn't realize those details just by looking at the wall. But once I explain the context, you now, I hope, are a little bit more thankful for Bob and for all of the work that had to go into building this wall than you were 5 minutes ago because you didn't know all of those things. What happens in our story today in Joshua chapter 24 is what Joshua does is he goes to the people and he says, guys, there's actually a lot of details that God is doing behind the scenes that you have not realized. And I want you to realize so that you can be more appreciative of what God has done to bring you to this spot, to bless you, and to give you this land. Because that's what we've been studying throughout the book of Joshua this year. God, like simple summary, God gives people land. Like that's really what the book is about. But there's a lot more behind the scenes that basically what Joshua is going to do for us this morning in Joshua chapter 24 is say, let me guys lay out to you all of the details so that you now appreciate what God has done even more. Kind of like what we just did with the wall. So I'd like you to open up right now to Joshua chapter 24, and we're going to take a look at some details that go on behind the scenes. And what's going to happen here in our passage is Joshua is just going to give a little history lecture, a little history lesson. And for those of you in this room that don't like history and those details do not excite you, my goal for you this morning is to excite you with details about God and what God has done for his people. Translate that today. And what God has done in his story of redemption, of trying to save the world from their sin, sending his son down to planet Earth to bring you to this point right now, sitting in the wiry chair that you're sitting in right now as someone that is right with your Creator. That sounds simple, right? Become a Christian. Do what? Repent of your sins, place your faith in Jesus Christ, right? It's very simple, very straightforward. But there's so much history and context, fuller context, that you should be able to understand so that you can now grow in your appreciation for what God does. So basically, today in this passage, Joshua educates people about the history of what God has done. And just like that introduction with all those details about stuff that you didn't know was going on, that's what Joshua does here. He gives a bunch of details. And before you check out, before the sermon even starts and say, I'm not a history person, God has called every single Christian to be a history person. All of us are called to be a history buff in terms of knowing what God has done so that you can appreciate him and so that you can worship him with greater, fuller context. You could be more thankful for the wall, knowing the details that happened behind the scenes. You could be more thankful for God when you know all the details that went on behind the scenes. Joshua chapter 24, get a little history lesson And I want you to walk away mind blown of history. That's my goal. Will I accomplish it today? We'll find out, okay? But I want you to be amazed by history that we read here and be amazed by how faithful God has been so that you can put your trust in him and so that you can worship him appropriately, to be more aware of what God is doing. Joshua chapter 24, let's read the first 7 verses together. We're going to read all the way down to verse 13 by the end of the sermon. But let's read some history, so let's lock in. Joshua chapter 24, verse 1. It says, Joshua, he gathered all of the tribes of Israel to Shechem, and he summoned the elders, the heads, the judges, the officers of Israel, and they presented themselves before God. And Joshua said to all the people, thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, long ago your fathers lived beyond the Euphrates. Terah, the father of Abraham, and of Nahor, they served other gods. Then I took your father Abraham from beyond the Jordan and led him through all the land of Canaan and made his offspring many. I gave him Isaac, and to Isaac I gave Jacob and Esau, and to Esau I gave the hill country of Seir to possess, but to Jacob and his children they went down to Egypt. And I sent Moses and Aaron, and I plagued Egypt with what I did in the midst of it, and afterward I brought you out. And then I brought your fathers out of Egypt, and you came to the sea, and the Egyptians pursued your fathers with chariots and horsemen to the Red Sea. And when they cried out to the Lord, he put darkness between you and the Egyptians, and made the sea come upon them and cover them. And your eyes saw what I did in Egypt, and you lived in the wilderness a long time. We'll stop there for a moment. But what we have here is basically a summary, right, of the first 5 books of the Bible. Right? You learned the story of Abraham back when you were in Kidsman. You learn the story of Isaac, right? You learn the story of Jacob and Esau. You learned about that whole thing, right? You learned about Joseph, and Joseph he went down to Egypt after he got thrown in the pit. You know these stories from the Old Testament, from the Bible. Why is Moses teaching a history of the Old Testament lesson right here? Well, in this section, Joshua 24, these are the last words of Joshua, where he's basically going to give them his final words, his final charge to say, now that you're moved into the land, I want you to, number 1, appreciate God and worship God. And then I'm also going to call you to be loyal to him, which we've seen that over the last couple of weeks in the book of Joshua. And so today what he gives is this backstory to say, hey guys, I want you to remember and think back to where you came from. All the way back to Abraham, and all the way actually back to Abraham's dad, Terah. And when the people used to live in another place, in a faraway land. Why does he teach this lesson here? Because he wants them to grow in their appreciation for what God has done, to remind them of something that they already know, so that they can appreciate what God has done to bring them to this point, to give them this blessing of the land. So point number 1, let's translate this into what do I need to do today, thousands of years later. Point number 1, write down this way: appreciate the historical arc of God's plan of salvation. The point of knowing history and knowing the arc of history is to know what God is doing to save his people from their sin. Isn't that what the Bible's about? Like, in a nutshell. Man sinned, God saved man, right? Well, I guess God created man, man sinned, and then God fixes the problem. What he does here by explaining all of these people from Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers, Deuteronomy as well, why he is sharing these details is to get them to appreciate God's faithfulness, which I hope throughout this year, we've done, this is sermon number, I think 21. How many times we've seen that theme play out in this book. God is faithful, and I've said it 1,000 different times, 1,000 different ways. God is faithful. God is faithful. God is faithful. Why are we hitting this point over and over again? Because it is easy for us to take that for granted. It's easy for us to grow dull in our appreciation of that. And so to get them to care, he has them look back in an old history book, if you will, and say, hey guys, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Esau, Joseph, Moses, Aaron, Red Sea, Egypt, wilderness, all of this stuff. And he goes on to explain more. What's the point of this? He gathers everyone together. Verse 1, he gathers not just the leaders, but literally everyone in Israel was about to die. And he says, guys, don't forget where you came from. Look back at verse 2 here with me. He says, thus says the Lord God of Israel, long ago your fathers lived beyond the Euphrates. Terah, the father of Abraham and of Nahor, and they served other gods. So basically what he says is there were people that were not following me. And then in verse 3, I took your father Abraham from beyond the Jordan, and I led him through all the land of Canaan and made his offspring many, and I gave him Isaac. The point being is God took this specific guy named Abraham, he brings them to the promised land, the future promised land, to then give him incredible blessings and to ultimately to save him. What is he doing by instructing them to think about Abraham? He's getting them to think about their spiritual forefathers, which I think is something for those of you in this room that are real Christians to think backwards in time and space and to think, who has God saved before me that has shared the gospel with me, and who shared the gospel with them? And we go back and trace our, if you will, spiritual family tree to say, oh yeah, that's right, we're connected to something much bigger than us. So subpoint A, right in this way, he saved your spiritual forefathers. I want you to appreciate the way that God has saved people in the past to bring it to the point of where you are saved if you're a Christian today. God has been working behind the scenes all the way up until you. Not that you are the focal point of God's creation. I mean, in the sense of like you are made in the image of God in that sense. But the idea here is that God has been faithful in the past, and he is working his plan to bring you to this point to save you as well. You're the next person in line. Spiritual forefathers is the idea of the people that God saved, who shared the gospel with you, who saved that person, who then shared the gospel with you, and then they got saved, and then they shared the gospel with you. And so for this, basically this lineage of this big, long family tree. And as we read this right here, and we think, okay, I'm a Christian though. I'm not a Jew, okay? Like how does this impact me? You know, I get it. If I'm a Jew, Father Abraham had many sons, and many sons had Father Abraham, and that's a big deal. Cool. But I'm not a Jew. I don't know how many Jews we have in the room. Probably not very many, right? What does this have to do with me? Well, I want you to see when you read the Bible, this is God's plan of working salvation. Adam and Eve, they messed it up through the Jews, and then all the way into the cross of Jesus Christ to open it up to Jews and to Gentiles. So you are sitting in this room because of, to some degree, what God has done in the life of Abraham by saving him. And look at verse 2. Who was Abraham's dad? We meet this guy named Terah. And what is the description that it gives here of Terah? It says that he lived beyond the Euphrates. So the idea is he did not live in the promised land, he lived far away. And it says, what did this family do? What did Abraham's family do? They served other gods. The idea here is that God converted someone, Abraham, who he was in a family of idolaters, of people who were worshiping other foreign gods. But God specifically, verse 3, he chose Abraham, he took Abraham, and he saved him. Write down Genesis chapter 12. This is when we get this story. Genesis chapter 12, we looked at this a handful of times throughout this study. Genesis 12, verses 1 through 3. The Lord says to Abram, who that was his name at this point in time, he's living in this faraway land, and he says, go from your country and your kindred, a.k.a. your family, and your father's house, to this land that I will show you. So he says, I'm going to take you from beyond the Euphrates, from this big river, a long ways away. I'm going to take you now to this specific land. And once you get to this land, verse 2 says, I will make you a great nation. We see that through Isaac here. And I will bless you, and I will make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Genesis chapter 12 is about some random dude named Abram. That God says, you're not a random dude anymore. I'm going to take this random dude, and I'm going to make his name great. I am going to use him to ultimately bring down the line, really long way down the family tree, Jesus, who is going to bless the whole world. He's going to save the whole world from their sin. You are a Christian right now. If you are a Christian, you are saved because way long ago, God chose this random dude named Abram at this point, who was worshiping other gods, and he says, I want you to worship me now, which in those days, there were not people worshiping the one true God. So what? I want you to be amazed that God saved Abraham, and that all the way down through his family tree, he has now saved you. Your spiritual forefathers. We can all trace back to Abraham. I can all trace back to Jesus, if you will, calling his disciples. I want you to meet this guy right here. His name is Pedro. This is Pedro here. It's a cool dude. Pedro came from Mexico, and he was a worker at the port of LA, and he was a drunkard. He was a gambler. And Pedro just went about his life. He had a couple kids, and he was just going about his business, working, drinking, gambling, until some person, I don't know actually all the details, to be honest with you, some person shared the gospel with this guy. And this guy, back in like the 30s, 40s, something like that, this guy became a Christian. Random worker at the port of LA becomes a Christian. And Pedro, I share the story about Pedro becoming a Christian because you probably think, oh, cool, man, like some random dude named Pedro became a Christian, right? But if you guys take a closer look at that picture on the right side, Pedro is writing his name in the tree. You know what his last name is? His last name is Fabarez. This is Pedro. Pedro Fabarez, my great-grandfather. Pedro was a drunkard, a gambler, living his life, and this is my great-grandpa right here. I've never met him before. He died before I was born. So, again, now you see where the Fabarez comes from, right? Pedro, great-grandpa Pedro. Pedro was a non-Christian, and he got saved. And what happened, the story goes, he comes back to his house after he gets saved. My grandpa says that he threw away all of the cards in the house. Like, he made sure all alcohol was out of the house. He literally did not let his kids even play with playing cards because he wanted to be so far away from his old former life. And you know what Pedro did? He shared the gospel with his kids. One of his kids being my grandpa, Grandpa Jake. Grandpa Jake, he taught his family the tenets of Christianity, and then my dad gets saved. And to think back all the way back in time, all the way back to some random, drunk, gambling dude at the port of LA named Pedro, all the way to the point of me, where I have seen in my life and in my family's lineage, if you will, that one person shared the gospel with my great-grandfather. He gets saved. He shares the gospel with his kids. His kid gets saved. He shares the gospel with his kids. His kids get saved. I'm a part of this long line of Christians in my family, and I hope to continue that on to my kids too, because some random person shared the gospel to some random guy. He gets saved and passes it down his family line. Now, I don't know exactly what your family tree looks like when it comes to Christianity. Some of you guys come from households where you can trace Christianity a really long ways back. Some of you guys in this room are the first Christians in your house, in your lineage, and you can be Grandpa Pedro, passing it on to your kids, who passes it on to their kids, who passes it on to their kids. Not that all of these people became Christians the day that they were born. That's not what I'm trying to say. You weren't born a Christian, but taught the tenets of Christianity, then believed in what God has done because of the faithful lineage of people who shared the gospel with this person, who shared the gospel with the next person. You have a family tree. It might not look as straight line as this one for you specifically. Some of you it is. But I want you to think back, maybe do some investigation this week. I was actually texting my dad this week, asking more questions about Pedro, asking more questions about how he got saved and what happened in their household. And you know what it makes me do? I was just praying this morning. I was praying this morning on my walk. I was just like, God, thank you so much for saving that random dude, the worker at the port of LA. Because then I am now saved because of the faithfulness of evangelism that has been passed down one generation to the next. I want you to grow more appreciative of God's long line of gospel workers, your spiritual forefathers. And it might not be your actual great-grandfather that was your spiritual forefather. For me, it is. But I want you to be amazed at what God has done. And again, I might just be some random dude to you. And I guess in one sense, I am a random dude. right? But I'm a random dude in this long line of random dudes getting saved. And then now my job is to go then pass it on to the next. And that is what your job is if you're a Christian. And what Joshua is doing here by getting them to think back to their, if you will, great-grandfather and the spiritual life of their great-grandfather, great-great-great-great-great-grandpa Abraham. He's getting them to educate them on the historical, spiritual backstory, but then also this is going to spur them to greater appreciation and greater worship of God. And I want us to be more thankful for the way that God saved Abraham, and then Isaac, and then Jacob, and then Moses, and then all the way down to Jesus, then all the way down to maybe your great-grandfather, or your grandfather, or your father. As someone in the line of Christians to continue to pass that on as well. That's what he's getting the people of Israel to see and to do right here. Look back at the text here in verse 4. He goes on to explain this parting of this lineage of going from Abraham, and then Abraham, he had a son named Isaac, and then Isaac, verse 4, he had a couple sons, one named Jacob, one named Esau, and then we see these lineage, these family tree lines divert. He says, Esau, I gave the hill country of Seir to possess. So he gave Esau a place to go, and Esau, if you know the book of Genesis, he kind of goes off into like unknown, right? We see him show up later, talk with Jacob for a couple minutes, but he kind of goes off into the unknown. But then we have Jacob. He has kids, right? He's got 12, right? 12 tribes. Well, he's got more than 12. He's got daughters too. But then that they go down to Egypt, right? Verse 4. And then God sends Moses and Aaron. And so then now they're in Egypt, and now they're taken out of Egypt, and he brings them out. He brings them, verse 6, to the bank of the Red Sea. The Egyptians are coming after them. He protects them there as well. What is he doing by tracing this long line of God choosing Jacob and not Esau, having them go to Egypt, and then taking them out of Egypt, bringing them through the Red Sea, all the way to, verse 7, all the way to the wilderness, the banks of the Promised Land. He's getting them to think back to not only the way that God has specifically saved Abraham out of a pagan household, but then how he's also sustained them throughout the years as well. So point B, right, on this way, he has sustained his people for centuries as well. I want you to see that in the long line of God saving people, that he has sustained his church, sustained his people year after year through trial after trial. Verse 4, it describes these two sons. More on this a little bit later in our second point. But Jacob and Esau, he's got two options here. Esau was the oldest, Jacob was the youngest. They were twins, so just youngest. He was a couple minutes slower. But the point here is that God specifically chose one, and he chose this one to bring about his people. And then he took these people through some difficult times in Egypt, and he even, look at the words that he uses here. He uses the word you, like over and over again, right? He says, I sent Moses and Aaron, they played in Egypt. Then I brought your fathers out of Egypt, and you came out of the sea. And the Egyptians pursued your fathers with chariots and horsemen to the Red Sea. He's getting them to be a part of the story here. To think about the ways that God has brought his people from this place to this place, through this sea, through these scary moments. God has done the same for us as believers. God has kept his people together. He's protected us from going off course. Write down Matthew chapter 16, verse 18. Matthew 16, 18. This is Jesus talking to Peter, and he says that, I tell you, Peter, you on this rock, I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. What Jesus says here in this passage, he says, I'm going to save this group of 12 disciples, and they're going to go out to the next, and they're going to go out to the next from Israel all the way to the ends of the earth. And I'm going to build my church, Jesus says, and no one to stop it. Generations of Christians, of followers of Jesus Christ, you are in that long line. We have this, oftentimes this, like a recency, like pride that we live in 2025, and our world is just us, what is right in front of us, maybe our phones, our social media, the stuff that we enjoy, and that's the only stuff that we care about. The people of Israel, they're the exact same way that you are, just without the smartphones. But what Joshua does is he says, I want you guys to get out of your little world, and I want you to think back to the world that came before you, and think back to what God has done over the years for the sake of his people. I want you to think right now about the way that God has protected his people throughout all the years. Think about church history. Maybe you don't know too much about church history, but there have been so many periods of church history where people have come after the church, right? You learn about martyrs, right? Do you know what martyrs are? Martyrs, someone that dies for the faith. If you go to the next slide, you've got people burning at the stake, or you've got issues with doctrine where people have to stand up against some wrong doctrines of the church. God has protected his people from persecution. He's protected his people from straying too far, doctrinally speaking, as well. Staying faithful to what his word has called us to. Again, I don't need you to be some church history expert necessarily. That's not what this sermon, I guess it's kind of what this sermon is about, but not really. But I want you to see, as you think back to Christians that have come before you, how God has been faithful to them. He has sustained them. He has sustained the church. He has sustained the people of God. And we are here, a part of that long line, that lineage of faithful Christians. I think we are tempted today as Americans in a very comfortable culture that is looking like in the future it's going to be less comfortable for Christians. And there is temptation for us to think, oh man, we look out at the world and we look out at the church, specifically in America, and we say, oh, this is really bad. There's lots of pride flags hanging outside of churches. There's lots of bad doctrine going on. There's lots of people leaving churches. Stuff is really bad. And the government's going to come after us, and then this is going to happen, and then this new leader's going to come into power, and then bad stuff is going to happen in the church. And we can get so focused with the news and events and articles that we read or things on social media, and to think, oh man, things are not looking good. But Jesus says that the gates of hell will not even prevail. So therefore, when you think about politics, maybe some of you in this room think about politics and you get worried, I want you to go read a church history book. I want you to go read the Bible. I want you to go see that God has not let his church, he's not let them fail. He's not let them fall off. Yes, there's been sin. Yes, there's been doctrinal problems. Yes, all of those things. But God is continuing to save people in every generation, and God will continue to do so. So when you look at news articles that are scary for the church, maybe you read stories about the church in China or in India or places like that are, the Middle East, where there's lots of suffering going on. To think back to the faithfulness of God to bring his people, the Israelite people, from all these different places down to Egypt, to difficult times there, to the Red Sea. God has protected his people. So therefore, I want us to be historians of the Bible. I want us to even be historians of the church as well, to see how God has been faithful over the years. And as we read the Bible, as we read stories about Jacob and Esau and Moses and Aaron and the Red Sea, I want us to not just think of them as Sunday school lessons that we go teach the kids over there in the kids' ministry classrooms. But it's a long line of Christians that should cause us to have greater hope in God and less anxiety, less worry in our life today. You can write down Romans 15, verse 4. It's talking about the Old Testament. It says, whatever was written in former days, aka the Old Testament, was written for our instruction, so that through endurance and through encouragement of the scriptures, we might have hope. When we read stories of history of how God has been faithful to his people, it should cause us to endure, and it should cause us to be encouraged so that we might have hope for the future. To think right now, fast forward to the time when you have kids. I don't know how many years away that will be. It will be probably a scarier place for Christians to be raised in the United States of America than it is right now, than it was when you were a kid, than it was when I was a kid, right? If the tidal wave of the culture is going the way that it is, and that can be scary. I've heard people say this before. I'm scared to have kids because the world is so bad right now. I want you to go read stories like this to be encouraged that God is faithful to build his church. The gates of hell will not prevail against it. And to go continue to do the Lord's work. And that, I don't really, sorry, what I mean by Lord's work, I don't mean just have kids. Well, I do mean that as well. But what I mean is to be faithful, to share the gospel to whoever's in front of us. It might be your kids. It might be the person sitting next to you in your math class. And to not be worried, to not be scared, to not be anxious. But what Joshua is doing by getting them to think about history is to say, look at all the bad things God has brought you through, and he's been faithful. And he's taking you to Egypt. He's taking you out of Egypt. He's taking you through the Red Sea. He brought you in the wilderness. There was some bad stuff. If you know your Bibles, it went on in the wilderness. But then look back at verse 8 here with me. He goes on to explain even more that God has done. Look back at the text here. Joshua chapter 24, verse 8. He says, I brought you to the land of the Amorites who lived on the other side of the Jordan, and they fought with you, and I gave them into your hand, and you took possession of their land, and I destroyed them before you. So we've got more history of more battles taking place. Then Balak, the son of Zippor, the king of Moab, he rose, he fought against Israel, and he sent and invited Balaam, the son of Beor, to curse you. But I would not listen to Balaam because he indeed blessed you. So I delivered you out of his hand. More on that in a minute. Verse 11, and then you went over the Jordan, and now we're into Joshua's day. You came to Jericho. And the leaders of Jericho fought against you, and the Amorites, and the Perizzites, and the Canaanites, and the Hittites, and the Girgashites, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites. But I gave them into your hand. And I sent the hornet before you, which drove them out before you, 2 kings of the Amorites. It was not by your sword or by your bow, for I gave you a land on which you had not labored, in the cities that you had not built, and you dwell in them. And you eat the fruit of vineyards and olive orchards that you did not plant. What is he saying right here? He's reminding them of not only how God has been faithful in the past, but God has actually been faithful right in front of the eyeballs of this generation too. And he's saying, guys, I want you to not forget and to see the blessings and see that God has given to you in your lifetime as well. Point number 2, write down this way, as we're thinking more present day. I want you to be more aware of God's grace in your life or your lifetime, in your day and age, in your experience on planet Earth. To be more aware of the ways that God has blessed you. And this generation that Joshua is speaking to has experienced verses 8 down to verse 13. They are experiencing it currently. They are eating the fruit of vineyards. They are living on this land that they did not lay before. They're living in cities that they did not build. Verse 13. It's easy to not notice all of the good things that God has given to you. It's easy to forget about those things. But what this passage does is it forces the people of Israel to think, what actually did I get? In a sense, Joshua is basically throwing the Thanksgiving tree out in front of them. He's like, just count what God has done for you. I want you to look again into your life at the things that God has done. And this whole passage here is trying to get Israel to think about God's incredible love that he placed specifically on them, that he chose them. Out of all the nations, he says, I chose you specifically. Subpoint A, I want you to write it this way. He chose you, not the other way around. God chose you. You did not choose God. You did not figure out God. He specifically said, I want you a part of my family if you're a real Christian. And the story of Israel here is not them finding God. It's about God saying, I'm actually going to choose you, Abraham, and I'm going to make you a nation, and I'm going to choose you, Jacob, not Esau, and I'm going to take you, and I'm going to have a relationship with you, and you're going to worship me. These Canaanites in this land, they all serve bad foreign fake idols, right? Just like verse 2, Abraham's dad and his family. But God chose specifically Israel to set his love on them. Turn a couple pages to the left actually with me. I want you to see it. Maybe even turning the pages will wake you up a little bit. Deuteronomy chapter 7. Are you excited about history? That's an honest shake of the head no. Okay, well, I'm going to do a better job this half of the sermon then. Deuteronomy chapter 7. Look at verse 6 here with me, that God specifically chose Israel and not other nations. And if you are a Christian, God has specifically chosen you to be a part of his family, not because you're special, even if your mom says that you are. You are not special. God specifically chose you to be a Christian if you are. Look at this, what he did for Israel. He says, Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 6. It says, you are a people holy or set apart to the Lord your God. And the Lord your God has chosen you to be a people for his treasured possession. In other words, you are not special, but God is going to make you special out of all the peoples who are on the face of the earth. It was not because of you, because you were more in number than any of the other people, that the Lord had set his love on you, and he chose you. For you were the fewest among all people. In other words, you were the small guy. You were short man. You were short king, and I chose you specifically. But it's because the Lord loves you and is keeping the oath that he swore to your fathers, that the Lord has brought you out with a mighty hand, redeemed you from the house of slavery, from the hand of Pharaoh and the king of Egypt. We just looked at that a minute ago. He says, verse 9, know therefore that the Lord your God is God, the faithful God who keeps his covenant and steadfast love to those who love him and keep his commandments to 1,000 generations. And he goes on to explain more. Why do I have you turn to this passage? Because in Joshua chapter 24, what Joshua is doing by getting them to think about the history of Israel is he's trying to get them to think about how special they are now made by God saying, I choose you, Israel, not because you're special, not because you're fancy, not because you give me anything, but because I want to set my love on you. Fast forward that concept to today. If you are a Christian, it is not because you are smarter than other people. It is not just because you were born into a certain family. God chose you, if you are a Christian, because he decided of all the random dudes, if you will, on this planet Earth, to say, I am going to choose you. And I'm going to put my love on you specifically. 2 passages to write down. Don't need to turn there, but just write down Ephesians 1, verses 5 to 6, and Romans 9, verses 11 to 16. I won't have you turn there. But both of these passages say the same thing. You are not special. God chose you to set his love on you. I want you to think about it like this. When we are out playing football on a Wednesday night, we choose teams, and it looks like a classic schoolyard pick. I want you to picture this for a minute. In this picture right here, we've got one guy on the left side who has all the power in the world, right? To choose whoever he wants on his team. He is the person that has the sole authority, if you will, on that football field to make his team what he wants. And then all these other people raising their hand, wanting to be picked by this guy, they are at his mercy. They have no power. They all want to be on his team. But the person in power is the one saying, I am going to choose you in the red shirt, but I'm not going to choose you in the white shirt. But typically what happens, and what happens every Wednesday night, is when picking teams, who's first pick? Someone that you want on your team. Someone that might be good, might be athletic, might catch the ball, might do what they're supposed to do. And then it goes from best to second best to third best to fourth best to my best friend, and then fifth best, and then like sixth best, and then you like toss it. Oh, my friend, oh, I care about him. It's like it goes down the line, and it always feels bad to be last pick. We've all been there. I've been there too. So don't. Yeah, it's okay. This is kind of a picture of what God does, not perfectly, but it is. I want you to have this picture in your head to see that. If you are a Christian, it is because God, the one in power, specifically said, I want you on my team. And he chooses you and not the person sitting next to you, except God does even more so. He doesn't look at who's the best wide receiver. He doesn't look at who is the most athletic. He doesn't look at, who might drop the ball if I pass it to them. No, he covers up, if you will, all of the externals to say, oh, wow, this person might be good. This person will be good for my team. No, he says, I'm going to just choose you based on me choosing you, not based on your abilities, not based on, you're the best person for the job. And what Joshua chapter 24 is getting Israel to think about is that God chose them not because they are special, but God chose a random dude who had a random dude, a random dude who had a random dude because God said, I want you on my team. And if you're a Christian, God did the exact same thing for you. And what he's done here for the people of Israel in Joshua 24 is he's brought them from Egypt to the sea, out of the sea to the wilderness. And then in our passage in verse 8, he explains that he clears out this land for the eastern tribes, the Amorites, verse 8, and Balak and Balaam, this whole interaction. And so I want you to see subpoint B that he has protected you many times as well. I want you to be more aware that God's protection for your life and taking care of you over and over and over and over again in your life. We're not going to get into all these stories of all these people, but you just, I guess take my word for it. Verses 8 to 10 is God explaining how he cleared out the eastern tribes' land on the other side of the Jordan. And then verses 11 and 12 is God clearing the land in the book of Joshua on the western side of the Jordan River. In other words, everyone here that is standing here before me is what Joshua says, you guys all got your land cleared out by God specifically. He has protected you. He has done for you great things. And I want you to just write down Numbers 22. Again, you don't need to turn there, but it's basically this story of Balak and Balaam. And Balak is this king over there on the eastern side of the Jordan River. Long story short, he doesn't like Israel. He wants Israel to die. And he brings this other guy named Balaam who's supposed to come give a curse on the people of Israel. He doesn't do it. He actually blesses them. He doesn't curse them. And so, in other words, what he's saying here is that God's saying, I protected you from this guy's curse, but he blessed you. Verse 10. And then verse 11, we know this story because we've studied it all year long. They crossed the Jordan River. They went to Jericho. They got all of those victories, if you will, in the land. All the booms. But I want you to think about it this way. I want you to think about how many times in your life has God protected and sustained you. That God has been your rock, your fortress, your refuge, your sustainer, your deliverer. You can write down Psalm 18, verse 2. It says, the Lord is my rock, my fortress, my deliverer, my God, my rock, in whom I take refuge, my shield, and horn of my salvation, my stronghold. All of those descriptions right there in that passage. How many times in your life has that been true of what God has done for you? Some of you in this room have been through trials before, been through difficult things. How has God been your rock, your fortress, deliverer, rock, refuge, shield, horn of salvation, stronghold? You won't know how to answer that question if you don't force yourself to intentionally think about it and to ask, or to specifically thank God for what he's done. You don't deserve God to protect you, but God specifically said, I have chosen you as my child to love you and to protect you. I want you to think about it like this, right? You guys know I just had my first daughter, right? I've got 2 sons, and I'm going to care about my sons. But everyone says, oh, having a girl is so different. And so far, it's been a little bit different, but I'm only like two months in, I think. And everyone's like, oh, hashtag girl dad, like, you love your girl, all that stuff. And I do. And this was me in the hospital. And I remember the first time that I held this baby girl, I was like, man, I love this person so much. I love the boys. I love both of them so much. And I held them and I love both of them. But I was specifically like, in that moment, I was like, man, I really love this little girl. And there's this relationship that a dad should have with his daughter of protector, right? Provider, sustainer. And in that moment, in that picture, as I'm smiling, looking down at my baby, newborn daughter, what has she done to deserve my love, affection, protection, me to basically, in that moment, I was like, I promise to protect you and all that, all the dad stuff, right? What did she do in that moment to deserve any of that? Nothing. She's done nothing for me other than be hard work, right? At this point in time. Like the snuggles and all this, yes. But what has she done for me? Nothing. But when I had her, I said, this is my child. I love her. I am now choosing to put my love on her because of who she is and my faithful relationship to her. And now I promise to protect. I promise to provide all of these things, not because she did something for me, but because I have chose to care for her. When you are a child of God, it is not because you have done anything for God. It is him saying, I love you because you are my child. I have chosen you. Of all the babies, if you will, in the hospital, I've chosen you specifically. And I'm going to put my love on you and I'm going to protect you. And the idea here is you didn't earn any of it. Look back at verse 13. Look at what you have done, what you deserve. He says, verse 13, I gave you this land, and you didn't do anything for it. You didn't labor for it. I gave you these cities. You didn't even build them. And you dwell in them. These are your houses. And then you eat fruit of vineyards and olive orchards. I've given you a bunch of food, and you didn't even plant it. The idea here is that God is giving gifts to his children that they do not deserve. Subpoint C, write down this way. I'll explain what I mean by this in a second. Subpoint C, remember that grace is grace. Remember that grace is grace. What do I mean by that statement? That grace, definition, is this unearned favor from God. Grace is this. Throw the definition on the screen. It's this unearned favor of God shown to an unworthy recipient. In other words, a free gift to someone that didn't earn that gift. Kaya doesn't deserve, she didn't earn anything. But because of who she is, my child, I will love her. I will care for her. Even though, if you will, she's unworthy in the sense of she didn't do anything to deserve it. What he says here in verse 13 is, he says, I gave you land, you didn't deserve it. I gave you cities and houses, you didn't deserve it. You didn't even build it. I'm giving you fruit, produce, vineyards, olive orchards. He didn't say pomegranates in there, but he means that too. Like, I gave you all this good stuff. What did you do? You didn't earn it. This is basically my free gift to you. God's favor for you as an unworthy recipient is giving you good things that you didn't deserve. If you think right now, this is kind of what Israel was in this this situation where he's given them land, but he's actually given them a house that is already built on the land. So if you think about like an empty lot and then a house built on a lot with a swimming pool, what God does here for the people of Israel is he doesn't just give them a plot of land, he actually gives them that house next door that is already built. It's already got furniture in it. And he says, it's move-in ready. You can have it. It's got a swimming pool already. It's houses that you didn't build, cities that you didn't build, land that you had not labored for. You had not figured out how to till the soil and all of those things. So in other words, he says, this is not just a good gift. This is a really great gift. It's even better. It's a better and best situation. Israel didn't deserve it. Israel didn't earn it. But God specifically chose to give them these good gifts for them to enjoy. I think people in this room, some people think that they earn God's favor by doing good things. If I read my Bible, God will do something good for me. If I pray, God will do something good for me. If I obey my parents, something good will happen to me. And again, we've talked about that concept, but God doesn't owe you anything but judgment. You have not earned anything but hell in this life. Everything that you have is from God. And I'm talking all the way down to the nice things God has given you, like a family, like a house, like clothes, all of those things, a phone. But I'm also talking about the ultimate gift of grace that God has given to you, his Son. God has given you his Son, the greatest gift that you didn't earn, that you earned hell. But Ephesians chapter 2, verses 8 and 9 says, for by grace, a free gift you have been saved. Not you working to try to earn your relationship with God. It is a gift from God, not a result of works, so that no one may boast. You deserve hell, but God has given you salvation. God has given you a right relationship with him. And I want you to appreciate that gift and all other gifts that God has given you more. That's why we spent a whole sermon talking details of things that God has done. It's like forcing you to write a thank you note. A thank you note is you being forced to think about the gift that you have been given, and you think, oh, wow, what did I get? Oh, that's good. Awesome. Great. I'm now going to express my thanksgiving to that person that gave me that gift. And we have an opportunity now to give a thank you note, if you will, to God for all the gifts that he's given to us by worshiping him in song. So I want you to bow your heads right now. Let's pray together. And then when I finish praying, you'll stand up and we'll sing one more song in thanksgiving for what God has done for us. Let's bow our heads and pray. God, we thank you so much for all the gifts that you've given to us, God, to think back to how you've been faithful to save people in the past, to bring us all the way to this point in time. God, I also thank you so much for the gifts that you've given us here in this life, in our own lifetime, the faithfulness that we've seen. But God, ultimately, we want to praise you this morning for what your Son has done for us. God, we did not deserve him to come to earth, but he did because he loved us. He gave himself up for us so that we could be made right with you. And God, what an incredible gift for us to worship and to celebrate this morning. So God, we pray that you be honored and praised by our song right now. I pray that we sing in Jesus' name. Amen.